This is the cover to the book, which is a very famous picture that a BLM firefighter took. And just to kind of give you a contrast to this, it's not showing up quite on the screen there real well, but this is a picture I took in essentially the same place a couple of years after the first picture was taken. The point being that even though the whole hillside in the picture looks like it's totally being an inferno, not leaving anything, the aftermath was not nearly as dramatic as may be implied by the picture. And there's a lot of that goes on with fire stuff in general. When you learn more about it, a lot of the things that we think about them turn out to be the opposite of what you would think, and there's a lot of surprises. One of the points that people are making more and more and understanding is that wildfire is one of nature's important ecological processes, and that a lot of different plant communities and animal communities either depend or at least tolerate fire. And so fire has a great influence on the landscape. And we can see this in a lot of different, using plants as an example, adaptations to fire. For example, ponderosa pine, a common tree east of the Cascades. I realize not everybody's going to know what these trees are, but I'll mention them in case you do. And Douglas fir, which is a very common tree in the forest here in western Cascades, have very thick bark that protects them from fire. Self-pruning, that's the loss of lower tree branches, as you see on this tree here, where you go way up before you hit any branches. That's an adaptation to fire, so that fire doesn't automatically have a way to get up into the crown. Rapid growth after a fire, as with redwood trees. Serotinous cones, those are cones that stay closed until they're heated. And a lot of trees, particularly the pines, have an adaptation so that unless they get heated to a certain temperature, they don't release their seeds readily. That varies from population to population. So it's not every lodgepole pine, for example, has serotinous cones, but it's a common feature. Sprouting from roots, big leaf maple, another common tree you have around here in Eugene, will sprout from its roots after a fire. So the fact that plants have these adaptations demonstrates that fire's been around for a long time and that plants and animals have gotten used to it. Another important point is that fires seldom burn everything. You get a mosaic of charred and untouched lands. And this is really important. When you hear the Forest Service or the media report that 1 million acres burn, what they're talking about is the outer perimeter of the fire. And so there's a lot of acreage inside that burned perimeter that's virtually untouched or only lightly touched. And a typical fire pattern, depending upon the scale, of course, you could have 100% burn if you're only looking at 100 acres. But if you're looking over 1,000 or 10,000 acres, you're going to find that very few fires burn everything up completely, as you might imagine. Now, one of the things that's fueling, to use a pun, the hysteria about fire is that we have more and more people building in these fire perimeter zones. Sprawling into disaster is a way to think about it. This is in the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana. But as people are building farther out, away from established communities, that creates more fire risk and hazard for the people who are choosing to build in those places. Right now, because of that, structure protection is now the largest cost in firefighting, particularly down in California. A lot of the money is being spent. If you're the firefighter out there, you don't really fight the fires. You're out there trying to protect houses, and you're spending most of your money and time and effort on that. So if a fire burns your house, we can call it a disaster. But if a fire burns a forest, it's not necessarily a terrible event. And I think we have this bias, a cultural bias, because obviously if our homes burn down, we're unhappy about it. But in terms of the forest ecosystem or other ecosystems, not all of them are forests that have fire, but in plant communities, fire is not necessarily a bad thing. Yet we have this pejorative language. Everybody knows this thing, the phrase, only you, and you can finish it, right? You know it automatically. It's been ingrained and drilled into your head. And we use words like in the media all the time. The fire destroyed so many acres. The fire devastated. The fire was catastrophic. We even saying something like recovering from a fire, you know, it assumes that the fire was bad because you recover from cancer or something like that, right? I mean, it's not such a good thing to have cancer. So we don't have a really good way to a language to talk about fire from a really informed position. When I was editing the fire book that I showed you at the beginning, even fire ecologists that who were very, you know, love fire, they just worked in. I was constantly redlining out the words, you know, the fire destroyed, and then I explained it. They go, oh yeah, I didn't realize I was saying it. It was just so unconscious in their way that they talk about things. Now, one of the surprising facts is that biodiversity is actually pretty high after fires, particularly severe fires. It's the opposite of what we would think. But there's a lot of reasons for this. One is because of that mosaic, so you have different age classes and different, you know, burned, unburned, and so forth, mosaics, as well as a lot of things like snags and dead trees and down wood are very important for a lot of species. And I'm going to get into this a little later, but I'll mention it now just to make the point. One paper I read said that 2/3 of all species depend on down dead wood or down trees at some point in their life cycle. 2/3 of all species. So, you know, to look at this as a disaster, as we typically say in our pejorative language, is to sort of negate the whole ecological value of these dead trees. And we have to turn around and look at it. This is just a little example of something that I've seen a lot of among the benefits of a fallen log, but you can see where the soil came down the slope, and as the trees fall on the ground, they act as natural traps. Now, if we go in there and salvage log after a burn as a common process, you don't have those natural traps capturing that soil, among other things. All right. There are differences around the country in the prevalence of fire. If you go into the Northeast, for example, in Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire, fires are almost non-existent, except in very specialized plant communities there. And that partly is because it's so hot and humid during the time of year when fire sources, i.e. lightning, is most prevalent. And if you've ever been in the summer in the East, you know how humid and hot it is. The opposite, though, is true in the West. In the West, it's dry. Even in Oregon, you can go 100 days or more without rainfall. So even though it's wet here in the wintertime, in the time of the year when you're most likely to have things dry out in the summertime, we tends to have a seasonal drought. So the eastern United States has precipitation year-round, and things rot there. That's good for bacteria and so forth. But in the summertime here, things dry out so that the main recycling agent in a lot of parts of the West is, in the arid climate, is from wildfire. So it's either arid or snow and cold limits decomposition of plants and things. And then we have a ready source of lightning, which produces the ignition source for starting fires. And when conditions are ripe for a big fire, and I don't like to use the term catastrophic or anything, I just say big fire. There's one that burns a lot of acreage. Humans cannot put it out. You have to wait until the weather changes. And this is sort of something that I wrote a book years ago about the Yellowstone fires, and when I was researching that book, there was I was reading back some notes and stuff, and there was a kind of an amusing commentary by a ranger back in the 1930s. He said in his notes, it was the biggest fire they'd had in Yellowstone prior to 1988. And after that fire, he said, we finally got the fire out, had a hell of a time breaking camp in the rain. And the point being that if you listen to the news carefully, you'll see that they'll say, well, the firefighters finally got the fire under control when the wind died down and it rained or it got cooler or whatever. In other words, the conditions that promote the fire tends to be a lot has to do with the weather.